I never thought I'd be sitting here telling this story to all of you, but sometimes life pushes you to a breaking point, and what happened that Christmas night changed everything for me. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life I've been the kind of woman who puts everyone else first. After Robert, my husband, passed away 3 years ago, my world narrowed down to just my son Marcus and his wife Sophia. They became my everything, my reason to get up in the morning, to keep this old house clean, to still set the table for more than just myself. When September came around last year, I started planning what I hoped would be a perfect Christmas dinner. It had been a difficult year for all of us. Marcus was working longer hours at his accounting firm, and Sophia. Well, Sophia was always busy with her social circle. You know the type. Designer clothes, charity luncheons that seemed more about being seen than actually helping anyone, and that constant, subtle way of letting me know I didn't quite measure up to her standards. "Mother Thompson," she'd say, never just Mom or even Margaret, "you really should consider updating those curtains. They're so vintage." The way she'd pause before vintage made it clear she meant outdated or cheap. But I was determined to impress her this Christmas, to show her that this old woman from what she called the wrong side of town could put together an elegant dinner party worthy of her sophisticated friends. Maybe then, just maybe, she'd want to visit more than the obligatory once a month. I withdrew $20,300 from my savings, nearly everything I had left after paying for the new roof last spring. I spent weeks researching recipes that would appeal to Sophia's cultivated tastes. I ordered a heritage turkey from a specialty farm 2 states away. I found imported cheeses that cost more than I'd normally spend on groceries for 2 weeks. I even splurged on crystal wine glasses that matched the ones I'd seen Sophia admiring in a catalogue she'd left at my house. The preparation was exhausting. My arthritis flared up terribly from all the chopping and stirring, but I pushed through the pain. 3 days before Christmas, I barely slept, waking up at 4 a.m. to start the complex recipes that required multiple stages. By Christmas Eve, my kitchen looked like something from a cooking show. Containers of precisely measured ingredients, handwritten timing charts and notes about each guest's preferences and dietary restrictions. Sophia had invited 8 of her friends, all women who moved in the same social circles, whose husbands worked with Marcus or were connected to him through Sophia's network. I'd met most of them during the ladies' lunches Sophia occasionally invited me to, though I always felt like an exhibit rather than a guest. "This is Marcus's mother," she'd say, never mentioning that I'd been a mathematics teacher for 35 years before retiring. During those lunches, Sophia would often step away to take calls, leaving me sitting quietly as the other women chatted. That's when I heard things, personal things, secrets they shared thinking the old woman wasn't really listening. Affairs, financial troubles hidden behind luxury cars, children struggling with issues their mothers wouldn't publicly acknowledge. I never mentioned any of it. It wasn't my place. I just sipped my tea and pretended to be interested in my menu. Christmas Day arrived, and I was up before dawn putting final touches on everything. My hands trembled as I set the table with the good china, wedding gifts from Robert's parents that had only been used a handful of times in 40 years of marriage. I polished each piece until it gleamed, arranged the centerpiece of pine branches and cranberries, and placed handwritten name cards at each setting. When Marcus and Sophia arrived at 3 p.m., 2 hours before the other guests, Sophia barely glanced at the table. "The centerpiece is a bit rustic, isn't it?" she said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "I told everyone this would be a formal dinner." Marcus squeezed my shoulder. "It looks great, Mom. You've outdone yourself." I smiled gratefully at my son, though I noticed he was already checking his phone, distracted by work even on Christmas Day. He was a good boy who'd grown into a busy man, pulled between his demanding job and his even more demanding wife. Sometimes I saw flashes of the sweet child I'd raised, but those moments were becoming rare. The guests arrived in a flurry of expensive perfume and air kisses. I greeted each one warmly, taking coats and offering the specialty cocktail I'd spent days perfecting, a cranberry and rosemary gin fizz that had received rave reviews on the gourmet cooking blog I'd been following. Everything was going perfectly. The appetizers were circulating, tiny blinis with caviar I'd saved up for, mushroom tartlets with truffle oil and goat cheese crostini with fig jam. The conversation flowed, and even Sophia seemed pleased, especially when her friends complimented the food. I was in the kitchen, transferring the roasted vegetables to a serving dish, when I heard the kitchen door swing open. Sophia entered with her closest friend, Jessica. They didn't notice me behind the large refrigerator door where I was retrieving the chilled butter for the dinner rolls. "Your mother-in-law really went all out," Jessica said. I know, Sophia replied with a sigh. It's sweet, but God, look at those paper napkins with the poinsettias. I specifically told her cloth napkins only. At least the food is good, Jessica offered. And then I heard it. The words that would crack my heart and change everything. Sophia lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. It's also trying too hard, you know? The mismatched serving platters, those tacky salt and pepper shakers. Tá parecendo festa de bairro pobre. It's embarrassing. I recognized the Portuguese phrase immediately. Robert had been half Brazilian, and I'd learned the language during our marriage. It looks like a poor neighborhood party. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally broke. I quietly closed the refrigerator door, my hands suddenly steady. The hurt was so deep, it had circled around to clarity. 3 years of swallowing Sophia's subtle insults. 3 years of being the convenient babysitter, but never the respected mother-in-law. 3 years of watching my son slowly drift away, absorbed into Sophia's world where I was, at best, an obligation. And now this, after emptying my savings, after the physical pain of preparation, after pouring my heart into every detail, to hear her dismiss it all as some embarrassing attempt by a poor old woman to play at sophistication. I took a deep breath and picked up the heavy platter of roasted vegetables. Dinner is ready, I said quietly, startling both women. The look of horror on Sophia's face confirmed she knew I'd heard everything, but I just smiled, a different kind of smile than my usual accommodating one. This smile had edges, because in that moment I decided this would be the last time Margaret Thompson was anyone's doormat. Christmas was about to get very interesting indeed. I carried the vegetable platter to the dining room with my head held high, that new smile still playing on my lips. The guests were already seated, their faces flushed from the cocktails and the warmth of my home. The home Robert and I had scrimped and saved for, the home where Marcus had taken his first steps. Everyone, I announced, my voice stronger than it had been in years. Dinner is served. As I took my seat at the head of the table, the position Robert would have occupied, I noticed Sophia shooting nervous glances my way. Good. Let her wonder what I might say. Marcus carved the heritage turkey, complimenting its tenderness. Mom, this is amazing. You must have been cooking for days. 3 days, actually, I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. And planning for months. It's not easy to create a dinner that doesn't look like it came from a poor neighborhood, you know. The table fell silent. Sophia's face drained of color. What was that, Margaret? Asked Linda, one of Sophia's friends. Her fork paused midway to her mouth. Oh, just something I overheard in the kitchen. I served myself some cranberry sauce, taking my time. Sophia was concerned that my efforts might embarrass her, that my home and my table settings might not be up to her standards. Marcus looked between his wife and me, confusion clouding his features. Mom, I'm sure that's not what... Actually, Marcus, I interrupted gently, those were exactly her words. In Portuguese, no less, thinking I wouldn't understand. Your father would have been disappointed. I turned to the table. Robert, my late husband, was half Brazilian. He taught me the language during our 40 years together. The discomfort around the table was palpable. Jessica studied her plate intensely, while Sophia's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. But let's not dwell on unpleasantness, I continued, my voice honeyed with false graciousness. After all, we're here to celebrate Christmas, aren't we? To share good food and honest conversation. Something in my tone made several guests exchange glances. They sensed a shift in the dynamics, like animals detecting a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Speaking of honest conversation, I said, filling the awkward silence, I've always found our ladies' lunches so enlightening, Sophia. Your friends are quite forthcoming when they think the old woman at the end of the table isn't really listening. Sophia's eyes widened. Mother Thompson, perhaps we should just enjoy this lovely meal you've prepared. Oh, but I've prepared more than just food tonight, dear. I took a sip of my wine, the expensive Bordeaux I'd splurged on. I've been saving up stories too, like how Jessica here has been meeting with her personal trainer 3 times a week, but not for exercise. Jessica choked on her wine. Or how Linda's husband doesn't know she's been funneling money into a secret account for years, preparing to leave him once their youngest graduates college next spring. Linda's face flushed crimson. That's private, is it? Not when it's discussed over mimosas while I'm supposedly deaf and invisible at the table. I turned to another guest. And Christine, does your husband know about the consulting work you've been doing for his competitor? The room was spinning with tension, but I felt strangely calm. Years of suppressed anger and hurt were finally finding release. Marcus stood up abruptly. "Mom, that's enough. What's gotten into you?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger, a man who had allowed his wife to belittle his mother, who had never once stood up for me when Sophia made her cutting remarks. "What's gotten into me?" I repeated softly. "Reality, Marcus. The reality that I've spent 3 years of widowhood trying to fit into a world that has no place for me, that I emptied my savings account to prepare this dinner, only to hear it dismissed as tacky and embarrassing." Sophia was now openly glaring at me, her social mask completely dropped. "You're ruining Christmas," she hissed. "No, dear, you did that when you forgot the most basic lesson of human decency. Don't bite the hand that feeds you." I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood up. "And I've fed you in more ways than one." I walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner of the dining room and removed a leather portfolio, Robert's portfolio, which I'd discovered last week while searching for our old Christmas decorations. "Marcus, did you know that your father left specific instructions about his estate? Instructions that were never executed because his lawyer died shortly after Robert did, and in my grief I never followed up." My son's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What are you talking about?" I opened the portfolio and removed a sealed envelope. "Your father was a careful man, a planner. He didn't trust electronic records, so he kept paper copies of everything important, including his will, his real will, not the simplified version we found after he passed." The dinner party was now completely forgotten as Marcus stared at the envelope in my hands. "Robert left the house to me, of course, but there were investments, Marcus. Substantial investments that his lawyer was supposed to reveal after his death. Investments that would have made these past 3 years very different for me and for you." "What investments?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly small. "Tech stocks primarily. Companies that were just starting when he invested 30 years ago. Companies that are household names now." I pulled out several documents. According to these statements, which I verified with the companies yesterday, those investments are now worth just over $28 million. The gasp was collective. Sophia's eyes bulged, and her expression transformed from contempt to calculation, so quickly it was almost comical. "But that's not all I found in Robert's papers," I continued, removing another folder. "I found evidence that your father was working with federal authorities during the last 5 years of his life. He was helping them track financial fraud, specifically schemes targeting seniors and retirees." Now Marcus looked truly alarmed. He worked in financial services after all. "Dad was working with the feds." "That's impossible. He would have told me." "Would he?" "When you were so busy climbing the ladder at Whitmore Financial, the very firm he was investigating." I laid another document on the table. He kept meticulous notes. Names, dates, transaction details. Apparently there's a division at Whitmore that specifically targets retirees with substantial savings, steering them into high-fee investments that primarily benefit the firm. The blood drained from my son's face. "Mom, you can't possibly think I knew about that." "I don't know what you knew, Marcus, that's the point. We've become strangers to each other. You've been so absorbed in your world, Sophia's world, that you never noticed how I was struggling, how I was selling off my jewelry piece by piece to maintain this house, hoping you might eventually move back in with your family, as Robert and I always dreamed." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were cleansing tears, not tears of defeat. "I spent $2,300 on this dinner, my last savings, because I thought if I could just impress Sophia and her friends, maybe I'd be worthy of being part of your life again." I looked directly at my daughter-in-law, but I realize now that was never going to happen, was it? I was always going to be the embarrassing mother-in-law from the poor neighborhood who didn't know which fork to use for the fish course. The silence in the room was deafening. Several of the guests were looking at their plates, unable to meet my eyes. Sophia sat rigidly in her chair, her expression unreadable. Then Christine, the quietest of Sophia's friends, stood up. "I should go," she said softly, placing her napkin on the table. "Margaret, thank you for opening my eyes tonight. The dinner was beautiful." One by one, the other guests made similar excuses, gathering their coats and purses, mumbling awkward thanks as they fled the emotional carnage of my dining room. Soon, only Marcus, Sophia, and I remained, the beautiful Christmas dinner cooling untouched on our plates. "Is it true?" Marcus finally asked, his voice hoarse. "About Dad's investigation?" I nodded. "Every word. I have copies of all his correspondence with the FBI agent handling his case, an Agent Delgado. I called him yesterday. He was surprised to hear from me. Apparently they'd been trying to contact me after Robert died, but someone kept intercepting their messages. Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "You," I said, looking directly at her. "It was you, wasn't it? The FBI agent mentioned they'd spoken to my assistant several times. I don't have an assistant, but you've been handling my mail since Robert died. To help out, you said." Marcus turned to his wife, disbelief etching lines around his mouth. "Sophia, is that true?" Her perfectly composed facade finally cracked. "It wasn't like that. They kept calling and sending letters about some investigation. I was protecting you. If the firm found out your father had been working with the feds, your career would be over." "So you knew," Marcus whispered. "You knew about Dad's work with the FBI and you kept it from me. From Mom." "I didn't know details," Sophia protested, desperation creeping into her voice. "Just that it had something to do with the firm. I was protecting our future, Marcus." "Our future," I repeated softly. "Not mine. Never mine." I closed the portfolio and stood up, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years in my aching bones. "I've made a decision," I announced. "I'm selling this house. Agent Delgado is coming tomorrow to collect Robert's files. And on Monday, I'm meeting with a new financial advisor, not from Whitmore, to claim my inheritance and make arrangements for my future." "Mom, please," Marcus began, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. I've given my life to this family, first raising you, Marcus, then supporting your father through his secret work, and finally enduring 3 years of thinly veiled contempt from the woman you married. That ends tonight." I walked to the Christmas tree and unplugged it, plunging that corner of the room into shadow. "You both should leave now. I have a lot to think about, and a new life to plan." As they gathered their things in stunned silence, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness mixed with a strange, budding hope. When the front door closed behind them, I returned to the dining table, looking at all the beautiful food that would go uneaten. I sat down, filled my plate with the turkey and all the trimmings, and took a bite. It was delicious. For the first time in years, I was eating on my own terms, in my own house, with my own worth finally recognized, not by others, but by myself. And that, I realized as I savored another bite, was the best Christmas gift I could have received. The days after Christmas unfolded with surprising clarity and purpose. I'd expected to feel guilty about my outburst, to be plagued by second thoughts or loneliness. Instead, I woke each morning with a strange lightness in my chest, as if speaking my truth had physically unburdened me. Agent Delgado arrived the day after Christmas, just as I'd told Marcus and Sophia he would. He was younger than I'd expected, early 40s perhaps, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, taking my hand in both of his, "I can't tell you how long we've been trying to reach you. Your husband was an extraordinary man. We sat in Robert's study, a room I'd barely entered since his death. It still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco and the lemon oil he used to polish the desk. Robert never told me about his work with you," I said, pouring us both coffee from the thermos I'd prepared. 40 years of marriage, and he kept this secret." Agent Delgado nodded thoughtfully. "He was protecting you. The people involved in these schemes, they don't take kindly to whistleblowers." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your husband uncovered a sophisticated fraud operation at Whitmore Financial, a division specifically targeting seniors with substantial assets but limited financial literacy. People like me," I said quietly. "Exactly. They would identify vulnerable clients, often widows or widowers, and gradually move their investments into high-fee products that generated massive commissions while dramatically underperforming the market." He opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Your husband documented dozens of cases. We've been building a case against Whitmore for years, but after Robert passed, we lost our inside source, and then our attempts to contact you were intercepted." I felt a flash of anger thinking about Sophia's deception. My daughter-in-law. She was managing my affairs after Robert died. Apparently, she was also managing what information I received. "Mrs. Thompson, I have to ask, is your son involved in these activities at Whitmore?" The question hung in the air between us. A mother's instinct to defend her child warred with my new commitment to truth. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "Marcus works in a different division, but I've realized there's a lot I don't know about my son's life anymore." Agent Delgado nodded, neither pushing nor judging. "Well, these files will help us move forward with our investigation. And, Mrs. Thompson," he added, his expression softening, "about your husband's investments. Those are very real. He was quite shrewd with his money. Once we complete the necessary paperwork, you'll have access to everything." After he left, taking Robert's files with him, I stood in the center of my living room, surveying the space with new eyes. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its ornaments glinting dully in the winter light. I began taking it down, carefully wrapping each bauble in tissue paper. Some of these ornaments dated back to Marcus's childhood, the clay star he'd made in first grade, the popsicle stick reindeer from third. I held each one, remembering the boy he'd been, wondering about the man he'd become. My phone rang constantly over the next few days. Marcus mostly, but Sophia too. I let their calls go to voicemail, not yet ready for their explanations or apologies or accusations. Instead, I focused on practical matters. I contacted a realtor recommended by my neighbor, a no-nonsense woman named Ellen, who specialized in homes in our neighborhood. "This place will sell quickly," she assured me after walking through each room, making notes on her tablet. "The market is hot right now, especially for well-maintained older homes with character. What's your plan after selling?" It was a question I'd been asking myself. For so long, my identity had been tied to this house, to being Marcus's mother, to preserving Robert's memory. Now, with financial independence on the horizon, I felt simultaneously liberated and adrift. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "Somewhere smaller, definitely. Maybe closer to the coast. Robert and I always talked about retiring near the ocean." Ellen smiled. "Well, with what you'll get for this place plus your investments, you'll have your pick of locations." On Monday morning, I met with Patricia Chen, a financial advisor from a firm with no connection to Whitmore. She came highly recommended by Ellen, who'd used her services after her own divorce. Patricia's office was warm and inviting, not the sterile corporate environment I'd expected. She listened intently as I explained my situation, Robert's hidden investments, the FBI investigation, my decision to sell the house and start fresh. "First," she said when I finished, "I want to acknowledge how difficult this must be for you. Major life changes, especially those involving family complications, are never easy." She opened her laptop. "Now let's look at your financial picture and make a plan that gives you both security and freedom." Over the next 2 hours, Patricia helped me understand the full extent of Robert's investments. The $2.8 million was actually closer to $2 million once all accounts were consolidated. With the house expected to sell for around $650,000, I would have nearly $4 million, a fortune I could hardly comprehend. With proper management, this will generate around $160,000 in annual income conservatively, Patricia explained. "You'll never have to worry about money again, Margaret." I felt tears prick my eyes. All those years of careful budgeting, of stretching Robert's teacher's pension, of selling my jewelry piece by piece. And all along this fortune had been waiting, inaccessible because of Sophia's interference. "There's something else I need to tell you," Patricia said, her expression turning serious. "I did some research on Whitmore Financial after you mentioned them. They're currently under investigation by both the SEC and the FBI for predatory practices targeting seniors." "I know," I replied. "My husband was helping with that investigation." Patricia nodded. "What you may not know is that the division implicated in the worst offenses is their estate planning department, headed by James Whitmore Jr. My stomach clenched. That's Marcus's boss, his mentor, and also Sophia's uncle, from what I could find," Patricia added gently. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Her uncle," she never mentioned. "It's not widely publicized. He's her mother's brother, so different last name, but they're definitely related." She hesitated. "Margaret, I have to ask, has your son ever approached you about moving your assets to Whitmore's management?" The question triggered a memory. About 6 months after Robert died, Marcus had suggested I simplify my finances by letting Whitmore handle my investments and retirement accounts. I declined, feeling some vague discomfort I couldn't articulate. Now that instinct seemed prescient. "Yes," I whispered. "He did." Patricia reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry. Family betrayals are the most painful kind." I left her office with a comprehensive financial plan, instructions for accessing Robert's investments, and a hollow feeling in my chest. The pieces were falling into place. Sophia's interference with the FBI's attempts to contact me, her uncle's position at Whitmore, Marcus's suggestion that I let the firm manage my money. Had my own son been grooming me as a mark, or was he just an unwitting pawn in a larger scheme? 3 days later, I finally agreed to meet Marcus for coffee at a neutral location, a small cafe downtown that Robert and I used to frequent. I arrived early, choosing a corner table that afforded some privacy. Marcus looked terrible when he walked in. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his normally immaculate suit slightly rumpled. He spotted me and hurried over, relief evident in his expression. "Mum," he said, reaching for my hands across the table. "Thank God. I've been so worried." I allowed the brief contact before withdrawing my hands to wrap them around my coffee mug. "You look tired, Marcus." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I haven't been sleeping. After Christmas. Everything's a mess. Sophia and I have been arguing non-stop. The FBI showed up at Whitmore on Monday with a warrant. James is under investigation and they've been interviewing everyone in the estate planning division." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mom, they interviewed me for 4 hours." "And what did you tell them?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Everything I know, which isn't much, apparently." His laugh was bitter. "Did you know James is Sophia's uncle? She never told me. All these years I thought I was being mentored based on my abilities, but it was nepotism all along." I studied my son's face, looking for signs of deception. "Did you know about the schemes targeting seniors? About what they did to vulnerable clients?" "No." His vehemence seemed genuine. "Mom, I swear to you, I work in corporate accounts. I never had anything to do with the personal client division," but he hesitated, shame crossing his features. "I did know something wasn't right. There were rumors, office jokes about golden geese, retirees with substantial assets. I didn't want to believe it, so I didn't ask questions. And when you suggested I let Whitmore manage my money," Marcus flinched as if I'd slapped him. "That was Sophia's idea. She said it would be a favor to me, helping me look good to James." He covered his face with his hands. "God, I was so blind, so stupid. I watched my only child crumble before me, and despite everything, my heart ached for him. He had always been eager to please, susceptible to stronger personalities. First his father's, then Sophia's." "What happened after I told you about your father's investments?" I asked. Marcus looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Sophia went ballistic. She kept saying we needed to convince you to let her handle things, that we couldn't trust you to manage that much money at your age. And you? What did you think?" "I was shocked, Mom. About the money, about Dad working with the FBI, about everything." He swallowed hard. "And I was ashamed. The things Sophia said about you, about your dinner. I should have defended you. I've been a terrible son." The raw honesty in his voice penetrated the protective shell I'd built around my heart. This was still my boy, flawed and human as he was. "I've made some decisions, Marcus," I said after a moment. "I'm selling the house. I've engaged a financial advisor to help me claim and manage Robert's investments, and I'm moving, somewhere new, somewhere by the ocean. What about me? About us?" His voice cracked slightly. "That depends on you," I replied honestly. "I won't be manipulated or belittled anymore. Not by Sophia, not by anyone. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on respect. And Sophia," I took a deep breath, "that's between you and her, but she will never be welcome in my new home." The firmness in my voice surprised even me. "I don't trust her, Marcus. And after what I've learned, I don't think you should either." He nodded slowly, accepting this boundary without argument. "The FBI agent Delgado, he told me Dad was proud of the work he was doing, that he was trying to protect people like you, like his friends and colleagues from the teaching days. Why didn't he tell me?" "I've been asking myself the same question," I admitted. "But I think he was trying to protect you too. He knew you worked at Whitmore, that your career was important to you. Maybe he thought if you knew, you'd be forced to choose sides." We sat in silence for a while, each lost in thoughts of the man who had connected us, who had lived a double life to protect others. "I filed for divorce yesterday," Marcus finally said, his voice barely audible. "After the FBI interviews, after learning about her uncle, I couldn't look at her the same way." I reached across the table then, taking his hand in mine. "I'm sorry, Marcus, I truly am." "Don't be, it's been coming for a long time. Christmas just opened my eyes." As we parted outside the cafe, Marcus hugged me tightly like he used to when he was young. "I'm going to make this right, Mom. Somehow." "I know you will," I replied, and for the first time in years, I believed in my son again. 2 weeks later, I stood in the empty living room of my home of 40 years, saying my final goodbyes. The house had sold quickly, just as Ellen predicted, to a young family with 2 small children. I liked the idea of the rooms filling again with laughter and life. Most of the furniture had been sold or donated, with just a few cherished pieces shipped ahead to my new home, a charming cottage in a small coastal town 3 hours away. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors where Marcus had once played with his toy cars, where Robert and I had danced on our anniversary nights. "Ready, Mom?" Marcus stood in the doorway, car keys in hand. He had offered to drive me to my new home to help me settle in. I took one last look around, feeling not sadness but a sense of completion. This chapter of my life as Robert's wife, as the proper mother-in-law trying to please Sophia, was ending, but another was beginning. "Yes," I said, turning to my son with a smile. "I'm ready." As we drove away, I didn't look back. The road ahead curved toward the coast, toward the sound of waves that Robert and I had always dreamed of retiring near. I was finally going to live that dream. Alone, but not lonely. Stronger than I'd ever been. Sometimes it takes a cruel whisper at a Christmas dinner to shatter the illusions we've built around ourselves. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find what we're truly worth. And sometimes at 68 years old, you discover that life is just beginning. The coastal air filled my lungs as I stepped onto the porch of my new cottage each morning. 6 months had passed since that fateful Christmas dinner, and spring had given way to summer. My little blue house sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, close enough to hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, far enough to be safe from winter storms. I'd named it Second Wind, a private joke that made me smile each time I thought of it. At nearly 69 years old, I had indeed found my second wind. The cottage itself was perfect. 2 bedrooms, a sun-filled kitchen with windows facing the ocean, and a wraparound porch where I spent most evenings watching the sunset with a glass of wine. I'd furnished it simply but comfortably, bringing only items that held genuine meaning: Robert's reading chair, our wedding portrait, the quilt my grandmother had made. Everything else was new, chosen by me, for me. The freedom was intoxicating. "You've done wonders with this place," said Ellen, my former neighbor and now friend who'd come to visit for the weekend. We sat on the porch, watching seagulls wheel above the water. "It helps to have actual money," I replied with a wry smile, pouring her more iced tea. "I still can't quite believe it sometimes. All those years of pinching pennies, and Robert had millions tucked away." Ellen shook her head. "I still can't get over Sophia intercepting those FBI communications. Do you know what happened with the investigation?" I nodded, setting down my glass. "Agent Delgado calls me with updates. Whitmore Financial is facing federal charges. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. James Whitmore and several executives have been indicted. They've identified over 300 victims, mostly seniors. The total fraud is estimated at nearly $40 million. And Marcus?" Ellen asked gently. "He's cooperating with the investigation. They determined he wasn't directly involved in the fraud, but he's had to surrender his financial licenses temporarily." I sighed. "He's staying in a small apartment near downtown, working at a friend's construction company until everything's resolved." "And the divorce? Finalized last month?" "Sophia didn't contest it. I think she was too busy dealing with her uncle's legal troubles. She moved back to Connecticut, where her parents live." Ellen studied me over her tea glass. "You seem peaceful about all of it." "I am, surprisingly. I watched a fishing boat on the horizon. I've had time to process everything. The betrayal still stings, but I've realized that hanging on to anger only hurts me. And honestly, Ellen, I'm too busy enjoying my new life to waste energy on bitterness." That new life had taken shape with unexpected fullness. After settling into my coastal home, I'd wandered into the local community college one day and discovered they needed a part-time math tutor. 3 days a week, I now helped struggling students master algebra and calculus, rediscovering my love for teaching in the process. I'd also joined a book club, a walking group, and most surprisingly, a watercolor class, where my initial awkward attempts had gradually evolved into passable seascapes. "Mrs. Thompson, hello!" a voice called from the beach path below my cottage. I leaned over the railing to see Miguel, a local teenager who helped with my yard work, waving up at me. "Come on up, Miguel, and bring your grandmother if she's with you." Minutes later, Miguel bounded up the steps, followed more slowly by his grandmother, Elena, a tiny woman with silver hair and sharp eyes who had become one of my closest friends in town. "We brought you tamales," Elena announced, holding up a foil-wrapped package. "My sister is visiting from Oaxaca, and we spent all morning making them." "You're an angel," I said, taking the package and inhaling the spicy aroma. "Please join us. I've got plenty of tea, or I can make coffee." As they settled onto the porch, I marveled at how quickly I'd built a community here, something that had been lacking in my old life, where Sophia's disapproval had gradually isolated me from friends and neighbors. "How are the college students treating you?" Eleanor asked. She had been the one who'd suggested I apply for the tutoring position, having worked as the college's custodial supervisor for 20 years before retiring. "They keep me young," I replied. "Well, mentally at least. My knees still remind me I'm pushing 70. We chatted easily as the afternoon stretched on, Elena sharing town gossip, Miguel talking excitedly about his college plans for the fall. Ellen fit into the conversation naturally, as if she'd always been part of this circle. Later, after everyone had left and I was preparing a simple dinner, my phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, Mom," he said when I answered. "Just checking in. How was your day?" These calls had become our new ritual, twice weekly check-ins that were gradually rebuilding our relationship. They were sometimes awkward, sometimes deep, but always honest. "Wonderful," I replied, describing my visitors and the sunset I was watching from my kitchen window. "How about you? How's work?" "Exhausting," he admitted with a chuckle. "I haven't used these muscles since high school summer jobs, but it's clarifying in a way, tangible. At the end of the day, I can see what I've built." There was something different in his voice, a groundedness that had been missing during his years at Whitmore, during his marriage to Sophia. "I've been thinking," he continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. "The FBI is wrapping up their part of my testimony next month. After that, well, I was wondering if I could come visit, just for a weekend." I hesitated only briefly. Our relationship was healing, but slowly. We'd agreed to give each other space, him to process his divorce and career implosion, me to establish my new independent life. "I'd like that," I said finally. "The guest room is small, but the view is spectacular." "Thanks, Mom." The relief in his voice was palpable. "I've missed you." "I've missed you too, sweetheart." After we hung up, I carried my dinner out to the porch, watching as the first stars appeared above the darkening ocean. The anticipation of Marcus's visit stirred complicated emotions. Love, certainly. Caution, still. And something else. Pride in how far we'd both come since that Christmas night. True to his word, Marcus arrived 3 weeks later, driving up in a modest used car that had replaced his luxury sedan, another casualty of his financial restructuring. I watched from the porch as he climbed out, noting how different he looked. Tanned from outdoor work, more muscular, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down rather than his customary suit. "This place is amazing, Mom," he said after hugging me, turning to take in the ocean view. "No wonder you don't miss the old house." "It suits me," I replied simply. "Come in, get settled. I've made your favorite lasagna for dinner." The evening unfolded with surprising ease. We ate on the porch, catching up on the details of our lives that didn't fit into phone conversations. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks, Marcus fell silent, staring out at the horizon. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months," he finally said. "About Dad, about the choices I made, about the man I became with Sophia." I waited, giving him space to continue. "I was so focused on success, on the right job, the right wife, the right address. I never stopped to question what right even meant." He turned to look at me. "Dad knew, didn't he? That's why he was working with the FBI. He understood what really mattered." "Your father was a good man," I said softly. "Flawed like all of us, but guided by a strong moral compass. I think he would be proud of how you're finding your way back to yours." Marcus nodded, blinking rapidly. "I've been offered a job," he said after a moment. "Nothing fancy. Assistant manager at a credit union in Portland, helping normal people with normal financial needs. The pay is about a third of what I made at Whitmore. And are you going to take it?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I already did. I start next month." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Portland's not far from here. We could see each other more often." "That's partly why I took it," he admitted. "I want to rebuild what we lost, Mum. I want to be a son you can be proud of again." The next morning, I took Marcus to my favorite beach for a walk. The tide was out, revealing tide pools teeming with starfish and anemones. We strolled slowly, stopping to examine interesting shells or unusual stones. "I have something for you," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a small box. Marcus opened it to find a simple silver key. "To the cottage," I explained. "I want you to know you're always welcome here." He closed his fingers around the key, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thanks, Mom, that means more than you know." Later that day, we drove into town for lunch at my favorite cafe. As we waited for our food, I noticed Marcus watching a family at a nearby table, parents with 2 young children, all laughing over shared desserts. "Sophia and I never talked about kids," he said quietly, following my gaze. "She was always focused on the next career move, the next social connection. I realize now we never really built a life together, just an image. There's still time, I reminded him. You're only 42. Life has a way of offering second chances when you least expect them. He smiled ruefully. Like your second wind? Exactly. I gestured around us. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. Now, I can't imagine any other. Before Marcus left on Sunday evening, we stood together on the porch, watching one last sunset. Christmas is in 4 months, he said suddenly. Would it be okay if I came back then? Made new memories to replace last year's? I thought about it, about how far we'd come, about the healing that was still in progress. I'd like that, I said finally. A small, simple celebration. Just us. Just us, he agreed, hugging me goodbye. As his car disappeared down the coastal road, I didn't feel the familiar pang of loneliness that had always followed his departures in the past. Instead, I felt a quiet contentment, a sense that both of us were exactly where we needed to be. The next morning, I woke early and took my coffee to the porch, watching the sun rise over the ocean, a daily ritual I never tired of. My phone pinged with a text from Elena, reminding me about our watercolor class that afternoon. Another ping followed, an email notification from Agent Delgado with an update on the Whitmore case. Later, I would read the email, attend my class, perhaps stop by the college to check my tutoring schedule for the week. My days had a pleasant rhythm now, filled with activities I enjoyed and people who valued me for exactly who I was. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about that Christmas night that had changed everything, how a cruel whisper had broken my heart but ultimately set me free, how I'd found strength I didn't know I possessed. I thought of Sophia, back in Connecticut, her carefully constructed world of status and appearances crumbling around her. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a distant sadness for what could have been, the family we might have been if kindness had mattered more than appearances. Mostly, though, I thought about the remarkable journey that had brought me here, to this porch, to this view, to this peace. The ocean stretched before me, vast and ever-changing, much like life itself. At almost 69, I had learned its most important lesson. It's never too late to begin again. The breeze carried the scent of salt and possibilities. I closed my eyes and breathed it in deeply. This was what freedom tasted like. Fall arrived with spectacular displays along the coast, not the brilliant reds and oranges of my old neighborhood, but a subtler transformation. The beach grasses turned golden, the ocean deepened to steely blue on cloudy days, and the sunsets grew more dramatic, as if nature were putting on one last show before winter. I'd been in my coastal home for nearly 10 months, when Elena convinced me to attend the town's annual harvest festival. You can't just sit on that porch all the time, she insisted, as we finished our watercolor class. The whole town will be there. Good food, music, crafts, even dancing if your knees are up for it. My knees haven't been up for dancing since the Reagan administration, I joked, but I agreed to go. The truth was, I was enjoying becoming part of this small community, something I'd never fully achieved in my old life, where I'd always been defined by my relationships to others. Robert's wife, Marcus's mother, Sophia's embarrassing mother-in-law. Here I was just Margaret, the retired math teacher who lived in the blue cottage on the bluff, who tutored at the community college, who was surprisingly decent at watercolors for a beginner. The festival was held in the town square, a charming open space surrounded by century-old buildings housing local businesses. Strands of lights crisscrossed overhead, and booths selling everything from local honey to handcrafted jewelry lined the perimeter. A small stage at one end featured rotating local musicians. Elena introduced me to what felt like half the town, the librarian who recommended books based on your mood rather than bestseller lists, the retired doctor who now crafted wooden toys for children, the harbor master with weather-beaten skin and stories for every occasion. And this, Elena said, leading me toward a tall man examining a display of blown glass, is my favorite person in town, after Miguel, of course. David, meet my friend, Margaret. The man turned, and I found myself looking into kind blue eyes, crinkled at the corners from years of smiling. He appeared to be about my age, perhaps a bit older, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. The famous Margaret, he said, extending his hand. Eleanor talks about you constantly. I hear you're quite the watercolor artist. Eleanor exaggerates, I replied, shaking his hand. I'm strictly an amateur who gets more paint on myself than the paper. Don't believe her, Elena cut in. She's being modest. David teaches literature at the community college. He's been trying to get me to join his book club for years. And she's been refusing for just as long, he said with a warm laugh. Perhaps you'd have better luck convincing her, Margaret. There was something comfortable about him, a lack of pretension, a genuine interest in his eyes as he asked about my move to the coast. We ended up walking through the festival together, Elena having mysteriously disappeared to check on Miguel at his friend's booth. David, I learned, had retired from a university position in Seattle 5 years ago, moving to the coast to be closer to his daughter and grandchildren, who lived in the next town over. He taught part-time at the community college to keep the mind sharp and the days structured, as he put it. And what brought you here? He asked as we paused to listen to a folk trio on the small stage. Elena mentioned something about a major life change. I hesitated, unsure how much to share with this stranger, but there was something about festival nights, the lights, the music, the sense of community, that encouraged confidences. A Christmas dinner gone terribly wrong, I said finally, offering him a simplified version of last year's events. I overheard my daughter-in-law making cruel comments about my efforts, and something just snapped. I stood up for myself, discovered my late husband had left me financially secure, and decided to start over somewhere new. David nodded, not rushing to fill the space with platitudes or judgments. Beginning again takes courage, he said simply, especially at our age, when everyone expects us to be settled and unchanging. Do you regret it? I asked. Leaving your university position, moving here? He considered the question, watching the musicians on stage. I miss certain aspects. The intellectual debates with colleagues, the energy of young minds discovering new ideas. But no, I don't regret it. There's something to be said for simplifying one's life, for making space for new experiences. He smiled, like meeting interesting women at harvest festivals. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the cup of spiced cider in my hands. We ended up sharing dinner at one of the food booths, talking about books we'd loved, places we'd traveled, the challenges and unexpected joys of aging. It was the most natural conversation I'd had with a man since Robert died. As the festival wound down and the lights twinkled against the darkening sky, David walked me to my car. I host a small dinner gathering at my house every other Thursday, he said. Nothing fancy, just good food and conversation. Would you consider joining us next week? I think you'd enjoy the group. I found myself accepting without hesitation. The Margaret of a year ago would have demurred, would have wondered what Marcus would think, what Sophia would say about the shabby, genteel gathering of retirees. This Margaret simply said, I'd love to, and meant it. Over the next few weeks, David's Thursday dinners became a highlight of my new social calendar. The group turned out to be a fascinating collection of local characters, a retired marine biologist, a former Broadway costume designer, a couple who'd sold their tech company to sail around the world and settled here when they ran out of oceans to cross. The conversations ranged from local politics to quantum physics, from the best way to prevent garden slugs to the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. No one cared what I wore or whether I used the correct fork. No one judged me for my rustic table settings when I reciprocated by hosting a dinner at my cottage. They simply appreciated the food, the ocean view, and the company. David and I fell into an easy friendship. We discovered a shared love of obscure British mystery novels and began exchanging our favorites. He introduced me to his daughter and grandchildren during their weekend visits. I showed him my favorite tide pooling spots along the coast. It was friendship in its purest form. No expectations, no obligations, just mutual enjoyment of each other's company. November brought storms that rattled my cottage windows and sent massive waves crashing against the cliffs. I loved these wild days, wrapping myself in a blanket on the covered portion of my porch, watching nature's spectacular show with a cup of tea in hand. It was during one such storm that I received an unexpected call from Agent Delgado. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice slightly muffled by the sound of rain on my roof. I wanted to let you know personally. James Whitmore pleaded guilty yesterday. The case won't go to trial. I sat up straighter. What does that mean? It means your son won't have to testify, and it means the victims will be compensated much sooner. The plea agreement includes full restitution to all identified victims of the fraud. That's wonderful news, I said, thinking of the elderly people like myself who had been targeted. What about James and Sophia's involvement? James is looking at 8 to 10 years, reduced from a potential 20 for his cooperation. As for Sophia Whitmore Thompson, he paused. We couldn't prove she knew the full extent of the scheme, but we did establish that she deliberately intercepted federal communications intended for you. That's a felony. She's agreed to a plea deal, 3 years probation and community service, specifically working with senior citizens. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophia, who had looked down on me and my poor neighborhood efforts, would now be spending her community service hours helping the elderly. "Thank you for everything, Agent Delgado," I said sincerely. "Robert would be grateful for your persistence. Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Thompson. He saved a lot of people from financial ruin." There was a smile in his voice as he added, "And from what he told me about you, I think he'd be proud of how you've handled everything." After we hung up, I immediately called Marcus to share the news. His relief was palpable. "It's really over," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I can finally move forward without this hanging over me." "How's Portland?" I asked, changing the subject to happier matters. "How's the new job?" "Both good," he said, and I could hear the smile returning to his voice. "Different, but good. I'm helping real people with real financial needs, first-time homebuyers, small business owners, families saving for college. It feels honest." "And have you made friends? Settled in?" There was a slight hesitation. "Actually, I've been seeing someone. Nothing serious yet, but nice. She's a pediatric nurse. Her name's Abby." "That's wonderful, Marcus," I said, meaning it. "Will I get to meet her at Christmas?" "About that." Now he sounded nervous. "I was thinking, if it's okay with you, that maybe Abby could join us. She doesn't have family nearby, and I'd really like you to meet her." The old Margaret might have felt threatened by this new woman in Marcus's life, might have worried about being displaced again. The new Margaret simply felt happy that her son had found someone who seemed to bring him joy. "I'd love that," I said. "The more the merrier." After we hung up, I made myself another cup of tea and returned to the porch, watching the storm gradually subside. The news about Whitmore, about Sophia, about Marcus's new relationship, it all felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. The following Thursday, at David's dinner gathering, I shared the news about the Whitmore case being resolved. The group had heard pieces of my story over the weeks and had been supportively indignant on my behalf. "Good riddance," declared Martha, the former Broadway designer, raising her wine glass. "To justice served and new beginnings." "To new beginnings," everyone echoed, clinking glasses. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, David asked if I'd stay for a few minutes. Once we were alone, he seemed uncharacteristically nervous, rearranging books on his coffee table and avoiding my eyes. "Is everything all right?" I asked, concerned by his sudden shift in demeanor. "Yes, absolutely." He sat down across from me, took a deep breath and met my gaze. "Margaret, I've greatly enjoyed our friendship these past months." "As have I," I replied, wondering where this was going. "The thing is," he continued, "I find myself hoping it might become something more. I know we're both at an age where new relationships aren't simple, where we carry our histories with us, but I've come to care for you deeply, and I wondered if you might consider, well, if you might be open to exploring what's developing between us." The unexpected declaration left me momentarily speechless. Since Robert's death, I hadn't considered romantic involvement with anyone. My life had been consumed with being Marcus's mother, with trying to please Sophia, with simply surviving financially. "David," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I'm very fond of you, but this past year has been one of tremendous change for me. I'm still discovering who I am on my own terms." He nodded, disappointment flickering in his eyes but quickly replaced with understanding. "I completely understand. I didn't mean to pressure you." "It's not pressure," I assured him, reaching for his hand. "It's just I need more time. Can we continue as we have been, and I'll think about what you've said." His smile returned, warm and genuine. "Of course, time is one thing we retirees have in abundance." The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a flurry of activity. The community college held its end-of-term celebrations. The watercolor class mounted a small exhibition in the local library, and the town transformed with tasteful decorations that enhanced rather than overwhelmed its coastal charm. I found myself thinking often about David's words, examining my feelings with the same careful attention I'd once given to complex mathematical equations. There was affection there, certainly. Attraction, too, though at our age it was a gentler thing than the passionate infatuations of youth. But there was also fear of losing my hard-won independence, of being hurt again, of disrupting the peaceful life I'd created. Meanwhile, I prepared for Christmas, a simpler affair than last year's disastrous attempt to impress Sophia. I decorated my cottage with natural elements: pine boughs, dried orange slices, cinnamon sticks, and sea glass I'd collected from the beach. I planned a menu featuring local seafood rather than an elaborate turkey dinner. Most importantly, I approached the holiday with a different mindset. This wasn't a test to be passed or a performance to be judged. It was simply a time to celebrate with people I loved, in my home, on my terms. Marcus and Abby arrived on Christmas Eve, driving up just as the sun was setting over the Pacific. I watched from my porch as they emerged from the car, my son looking healthier and more at ease than I'd seen him in years, and a petite woman with curly auburn hair and a ready smile. "Mom," Marcus said, hugging me tightly. "This is Abby. Abby, my mother, Margaret." "It's so wonderful to meet you," Abby said, embracing me without hesitation. "Marcus has told me so much about you, and this place is absolutely magical." Her enthusiasm was infectious, her warmth immediate and genuine. As we entered the cottage, she exclaimed over the view, the decorations, the simplicity and beauty of everything. "I hope you don't mind," she said, reaching into her bag, "but I brought something." She handed me a small, carefully wrapped package. "It's a tradition in my family, a new ornament each Christmas Eve." Inside was a delicate glass sea star, catching the light from my modest tree. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." We hung it together on the tree, and in that simple act I felt a connection forming, not the wary, competitive relationship I'd had with Sophia, but something supportive and kind. Dinner that night was relaxed and joyful. Abby turned out to be not only warm but intelligent and funny, sharing stories from her pediatric ward that had us alternately laughing and blinking back tears. She drew Marcus out in ways I hadn't seen before, encouraging him to talk about his new job, his new apartment, his new life. And she asked about me, genuine questions about my tutoring, my watercolors, my friends in town. She wanted to see my paintings, and her admiration seemed sincere rather than performative. After dinner, we sat by the fireplace, the lights from the Christmas tree casting a warm glow over the room. Outside, waves crashed against the cliffs in a soothing rhythm. "I have something for both of you," I said, retrieving an envelope from the mantel. "An early Christmas gift." Inside was a letter from Patricia Chen, my financial advisor, outlining the establishment of a trust fund for Marcus's future children, Abby's future children, if their relationship continued to flourish. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is incredibly generous." "Your father would have wanted it," I replied simply. "He believed in education, in giving children the tools to build their own futures. This will ensure that your children, whenever they arrive, will have those opportunities." Abby squeezed Marcus's hand, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you, Margaret. This means more than you know." Later, after they'd gone to bed in the guest room, I sat alone on the porch, watching the moonlight play across the waves. The contrast between this Christmas and the last couldn't have been more stark. Last year, pain and betrayal. This year, healing and hope. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David. "Merry Christmas, Margaret. Thinking of you tonight." I smiled, typing back, "Merry Christmas, David. Looking forward to seeing you at New Year's." As I pressed send, I realized I'd made my decision. The coming year would bring yet another new beginning. Not just friendship, but the possibility of love. Not the passionate, all-consuming love of youth, but something equally valuable, a companionship based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection. At 69, I had discovered that life continues to offer surprises, that growth doesn't end with wrinkles or gray hair, that the heart remains capable of expansion, even after it's been broken. The cruel whisper I'd overheard last Christmas had shattered my world, but from those fragments I'd built something stronger, truer, and infinitely more beautiful. I raised my wineglass to the moon, to the ocean, to the universe that had both challenged and blessed me. "To second winds," I whispered, "and third and fourth and however many it takes." The waves answered with their eternal rhythm, promising that, like them, life would continue to ebb and flow, bringing both storms and calm, both loss and discovery, and that I had the strength to navigate it all. The first anniversary of my Great Awakening, as Elena had taken to calling it, arrived with the following Christmas season. So much had changed in a single year that sometimes I had to pause and remind myself that the woman I now was, confident, content, engaged with life, had once been the anxious, people-pleasing Margaret who had emptied her savings account to impress a daughter-in-law who despised her. "You're like one of those before and after makeover shows," Eleanor joked as we decorated my cottage for the upcoming holidays. "Except it's your whole life that got the makeover, not just your hair." "Speaking of hair," I replied, tucking a strand of my silver bob behind my ear, "what do you think about this cut?" David mentioned he liked my hair longer. Elena stepped back from the pine garland she was arranging and fixed me with a stern look. "Margaret Thompson, you're not growing out your hair because a man said he preferred it." That's the old Margaret talking. I laughed, but she had a point. My relationship with David had blossomed over the past year, bringing joy and companionship I hadn't expected to find again at my age. But I was careful to maintain my independence, my sense of self separate from our couplehood. "You're right," I conceded. "I like it this way. Easier to manage when I'm painting or walking on the beach." "Exactly," Elena nodded approvingly. "Besides, David adores you regardless of your haircut. The man practically follows you around with hearts in his eyes." It was true. Our relationship had progressed slowly but steadily throughout the year. We still maintained separate homes, his cozy craftsman bungalow in town, my beloved ocean view cottage, but we spent most evenings together, cooking dinner, reading by the fire, attending community events, or simply watching the sunset from my porch. At 71 and 69, we approached romance differently than we might have in our youth. There was less urgency, more appreciation for the simple pleasure of companionship. Physical intimacy had developed naturally, unhurried and tender, free from the insecurities of younger years. "Have you and David discussed the future?" Elena asked, her bluntness one of the qualities I most appreciated about her. "We've talked about it," I admitted, adjusting a string of white lights on my modestly sized tree. "He's proposed marriage twice now." Elena nearly dropped the ornament she was holding. "Twice? And you're just mentioning this now? What did you say?" "I said I needed time to think." I shrugged, trying to appear more casual than I felt. "Marriage is a big step, especially at our age." "Margaret," Elena set down the ornament and took my hands in hers. "Why are you hesitating? That man is the best thing that's happened to you since you moved here." I sighed, trying to articulate feelings I was still sorting through myself. I spent 40 years as Robert's wife, then 3 years as his widow. I've only had a year as just Margaret. I'm still discovering who that is. Elena squeezed my hands before releasing them. "Fair enough, but don't wait too long. At our age, time is precious." It was a sobering reminder, but a necessary one. Later that evening, after Elena had left and I was alone with my thoughts, I found myself reflecting on the year's journey. Not just my relationship with David, but with Marcus, with myself, with my new community. Marcus and Abby were now engaged, planning a small spring wedding. They'd visited several times throughout the year, and with each visit I'd seen my son grow more confident, more grounded. The ambitious, status-conscious young man who'd married Sophia had been replaced by someone more authentic, more like the boy I'd raised. Abby's influence was undeniable. Her warmth and unpretentiousness had helped Marcus rediscover his true self beneath years of corporate conditioning. His career at the credit union was flourishing in unexpected ways. Rather than climbing a corporate ladder, he'd found purpose in developing financial literacy programs for high school students and recent immigrants. "I want to make sure they understand money before predators like James Whitmore can take advantage of them," he'd explained during their Thanksgiving visit. As for Sophia, I rarely thought of her these days. Marcus occasionally mentioned her in passing. She'd moved to New York after completing her community service, apparently working for a public relations firm and dating a hedge fund manager. The news provoked no emotional response in me, beyond a vague hope that she'd found whatever it was she'd been searching for with her endless social climbing. My phone chimed with a text from David. "Dinner still on for tonight? I've got a surprise." I smiled, typing back, "Of course, 7 p.m. Should I be worried about this surprise?" His response came immediately, "Only if you're afraid of joy." At precisely 7 o'clock, David arrived with a bouquet of winter blooms and a mysterious twinkle in his eye. "You seem especially pleased with yourself tonight," I observed, as I took the flowers and led him into the kitchen, where a pot of bouillabaisse, his favorite, simmered on the stove. "I have reason to be," he replied, stealing a kiss before hanging his coat on the hook by the door, a hook that had gradually become his over the months. "But dinner first. That smells incredible." We ate at the small table by the kitchen window, the ocean visible beyond, illuminated by a nearly full moon. David asked about my day, about Elena's visit, about my plans for the upcoming art show at the community center, where 3 of my watercolors would be displayed. "Enough about me," I said finally, curiosity getting the better of me. "What's this surprise you've been hinting at?" David smiled, reaching into his pocket. "I've been thinking about our conversations regarding marriage." My heart skipped a beat. "David," he held up a hand, No, this isn't proposal number 3. I've been listening to your concerns, Margaret. Your need for independence, your journey of self-discovery. He placed a small box on the table between us. This is something different. I opened the box to find a key, similar to the one I'd given Marcus, but attached to a beautiful silver keychain with a small ocean wave charm. A key to your house, I guessed. Yes, but it's more than that. He reached across the table to take my hand. It's an invitation to share our lives without merging them completely, to have the freedom to be together when we want, and apart when we need our own space. I turned the key over in my palm, feeling its weight, understanding the significance of what he was offering. I love you, Margaret, he continued, his voice gentle. I would marry you tomorrow if that's what you wanted, but what I want most is for you to be happy, with me, with yourself, with your life. So this key is a promise that I'll never try to diminish the woman you've become. I'll only seek to walk beside her for as long as we have. Tears pricked my eyes at the thoughtfulness of his gesture, at his willingness to meet me where I was, rather than where tradition said we should be. It's perfect, I said, closing my fingers around the key. Thank you for understanding. Later, as we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the December chill, watching the moon's path across the water, David asked about my Christmas plans. Marcus and Abby will be here on Christmas Eve, staying through the 26th, I told him. They're spending New Year's with her family in Seattle. Would you mind if I joined you for Christmas dinner? He asked. I'll have breakfast with Rebecca and the grandkids in the morning, but they have plans with her in-laws for dinner. I'd love that, I replied sincerely. Marcus and Abby adore you. It was true. During their visits, David had effortlessly charmed them both with his wit, intelligence, and genuine interest in their lives. Unlike my strained relationship with Sophia, where every interaction felt like a competition or judgment, David and my son's fiancée had connected immediately over their shared love of obscure indie films. Speaking of the holidays, David said, his voice deceptively casual, Rebecca asked if you might join us for their Christmas Eve brunch this year. The grandkids are desperate to show you their new puppy. I smiled, touched by the invitation. David's daughter Rebecca had welcomed me into their family circle with a warmth that still surprised me. Her children, 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Liam, had decided I was their honorary grandmother, presenting me with handmade cards addressed to Grandma Margaret and seeking my opinion on everything from school projects to the aforementioned new puppy. I'd be honored, I said, as long as it doesn't conflict with Marcus and Abby's arrival. They're not due until the afternoon, right? Brunch is at 10. He squeezed my hand. It would mean a lot to them, to me too. That night, after David had gone home to his own house, a pattern we maintained despite the increasing frequency of our sleepovers, I sat alone with my thoughts, the key he'd given me on the table before me. It represented something I'd never had in my previous life, the freedom to define a relationship on my own terms, to be loved without being possessed. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the ocean a deeper blue than usual against the pale winter sky. I drove to Rebecca's charming Cape Cod-style home, bearing gifts for the children and a tray of my special cranberry orange scones for brunch. Margaret, Emma cried as she flung open the door, hurling herself at me with the unrestrained enthusiasm only a child can muster. Come see Rocket, he learned to sit. Well, mostly. Sometimes he just falls over. Rocket turned out to be an exuberant golden retriever puppy who indeed had only a tenuous grasp of the sit command, but made up for it with boundless affection. The brunch was chaotic in the best way, children and dog underfoot, David and Rebecca cooking together in perfect sync, conversation and laughter flowing freely. Dad never stops talking about you, Rebecca confided as we washed dishes afterward. I haven't seen him this happy since before Mom got sick. David's wife had died of cancer 8 years earlier, a long and painful decline that had left deep marks on the entire family. He's been a blessing in my life too, I replied honestly. I never expected to find love again at my age. Rebecca dried a plate thoughtfully. You know, he told me about the key, about respecting your independence. She smiled. That's so Dad, always trying to find the perfect solution to make everyone happy. It was very thoughtful, I agreed. But you know, she continued, lowering her voice, if you ever did want to marry him, you'd have my complete blessing. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Mom, and they were deeply in love. Her words stayed with me as I drove home later that afternoon, preparing for Marcus and Abby's arrival. Was I being overly cautious by resisting marriage? Was I denying both David and myself a deeper commitment out of fear? These thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of my son and his fiancée, bearing gifts and wedding planning folders They were eager to share. "We've decided on a small ceremony at the lighthouse," Abby announced as we settled in the living room with mugs of hot chocolate. "Just family and close friends. And of course we want you to be heavily involved, Margaret." "I'd be delighted," I said, "but it's your day. I don't want to impose." Marcus and Abby exchanged glances. "Actually," my son said, "we were hoping you'd do more than just attend. Abby's parents died when she was in college and, well, we were wondering if you'd consider walking her down the aisle." Emotion caught in my throat. "Me? But that's traditionally—" "We know," Abby interrupted gently, "but nothing about us is traditional, and you've become so important to me this past year, Margaret. You're the mother I haven't had for a long time." Tears welled in my eyes. "I would be honored," I managed to say. The evening progressed with wedding discussions, gift exchanges, and preparations for the next day's Christmas dinner. As we worked together in the kitchen, I was struck by how different this felt from last year's gathering. The ease, the genuine warmth, the absence of judgment or pretense. Christmas Day brought more gifts, a long walk on the beach and David joining us for dinner. A simple but delicious meal of local seafood and winter vegetables, with none of the stress or performance anxiety of previous holidays. After dinner, as we sat around the fire with dessert and coffee, Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, Abby and I have been talking. With the wedding coming up and hopefully children in the next few years, we've been thinking about family, about closeness." He took Abby's hand. "We've decided to look for jobs in this area, to move closer to you." I nearly spilled my coffee. "Are you serious? What about your position at the credit union?" "It's a good job, but there are credit unions here too," he said with a smile. "And hospitals always need pediatric nurses. We want our future kids to grow up near their grandmother, to have what I had when I was young, family nearby, Sunday dinners, someone to call when things go wrong." The wave of emotion that washed over me was overwhelming. After years of feeling marginalized in my son's life, to hear that he wanted to be closer, to make me a central part of his future family, it was everything I hadn't dared to hope for. "I think that's a wonderful idea," David said into the emotional silence. "And if you need help with the job search, Rebecca's husband works for the regional hospital network. He might know of openings." The conversation turned to practical matters, housing markets, job opportunities, timeframes, but my mind was elsewhere, contemplating the remarkable turn my life had taken in a single year. From a Christmas of heartbreak and revelation, to a Christmas of reconciliation and hope. From financial anxiety to security, from loneliness to love, from being defined by others to defining myself. Later that night, after Marcus and Abby had gone to bed, and David was preparing to leave, I stopped him at the door. "I've been thinking about your key," I said, touching the silver wave keychain that now held pride of place on my keyring. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with concern. "No, having different thoughts." I took a deep breath. "You've offered me the perfect compromise. Togetherness with independence. But I'm wondering if perhaps I've been too cautious, too afraid of losing myself again." He waited patiently, giving me space to find the words. "The truth is, David, I'm not the woman I was with Robert, or during those years with Sophia. I'm stronger now, more certain of who I am. And I realize that sharing my life completely with you wouldn't diminish that strength. It would enhance it." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Margaret, are you saying—" "Ask me again," I said softly. "About marriage. Ask me one more time." A slow smile spread across his face. He took both my hands in his, and rather than kneeling, a gesture we both agreed would be hard on his knees at 71, he simply looked into my eyes. "Margaret Thompson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because either of us needs completion, but because together, we create something even more beautiful than what we are apart." "Yes," I said simply. "I would love that." The joy that blazed in his eyes was worth every moment of hesitation, every fear I'd had to overcome. "When should we tell the others?" he asked as we embraced. I thought about Marcus and Abby, sleeping upstairs, planning their own new beginning. About Elena, who would crow with delight at being right. About the Thursday dinner group, who had watched our relationship develop with benevolent interest. Tomorrow, I decided. Tonight, it's just for us. After David left, promising to return for breakfast, I took my customary place on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the winter chill. The ocean stretched before me, vast and mysterious in the darkness, yet somehow familiar, a constant presence in my new life. 2 years ago, I could never have imagined sitting here, financially secure, surrounded by a loving community, engaged to a kind and brilliant man, with my son planning to move closer rather than further away. It had taken a cruel whisper at a Christmas dinner to break me open, to show me what I was capable of. In that painful moment, when Sophia's words had sliced through my heart, something new had been born, a Margaret who would never again allow herself to be diminished or dismissed. As I watched the moonlight dance on the waves, I made a silent promise to myself to always remember the woman I'd become, to never lose her again, to carry her strength and wisdom into this next chapter. The wind whispered through the beach grasses, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. Another Christmas had come and gone, but unlike the last, this one had affirmed rather than destroyed. I closed my eyes, listening to the eternal rhythm of the waves, feeling profoundly grateful for second chances, for new beginnings, for the unexpected gifts that sometimes come disguised as heartbreak. And for the first time in many years, I felt completely, utterly at peace. 5 years have passed since that transformative Christmas night when I overheard Sophia's cruel whisper. I'm 74 now. With silver hair I've finally let grow past my shoulders, my own choice despite David's preferences, and hands that show more prominent veins but can still create watercolors that sell modestly well at the local gallery. David and I married in a simple ceremony on my cottage porch the spring after our engagement, with the ocean as our witness and our blended family surrounding us. I wore a pale blue dress that matched the sea on clear days, and David surprised me by learning to waltz for our first dance, despite his arthritic knee. We decided to maintain both our homes, his bungalow in town and my beloved cottage on the bluff, spending time at each according to our moods and needs. It's an unconventional arrangement that raises eyebrows among more traditional couples, but it works perfectly for us. Some nights we need company, some nights we need solitude. At our age, we've learned that accommodation is a form of love. Marcus and Abby moved to our coastal town 4 years ago, after their wedding at the lighthouse. Marcus now works as the financial director for a local non-profit that helps low-income families achieve home ownership, work that he finds far more fulfilling than his corporate days. Abby took a position at the Regional Children's Hospital, where she quickly became a favorite among patients and staff alike. 3 years ago, they made me a grandmother with the birth of Robert James Thompson, named for both his grandfathers. Little RJ, as we call him, is now a whirlwind of energy with his mother's curly auburn hair and his father's thoughtful eyes. Last year, they added to our family with Lily Margaret, a delicate baby girl with a surprisingly strong personality. The cottage on the bluff has become the center of our extended family's life. Sunday dinners are a tradition now, with Marcus and Abby bringing the children, and often David's daughter Rebecca joining with her family as well. The dining table that once witnessed my humiliation now hosts joyful, chaotic meals, where the only judgment is whether my blueberry pie is as good as last week's. It usually is. Eleanor remains my closest friend, though she now uses a cane and complains bitterly about her unreliable knees. She still scolds me when I need it and cheers my successes with unabashed pride. Her grandson Miguel graduated from college last year, the first in his family to do so, with a degree in marine biology, funded in part by a scholarship I quietly established after claiming my inheritance. As for Sophia, I heard from Marcus that she remarried 2 years ago, a wealthy real estate developer, 20 years her senior. I felt no bitterness at the news, only a distant hope that she'd found whatever she was searching for. Her uncle James was released from prison last year after serving his sentence, apparently a changed man who now works with ex-offenders to help them reintegrate into society. The Whitmore case ultimately led to industry-wide reforms in financial protections for seniors, a legacy Robert would have been proud of. Agent Delgado still sends me a Christmas card each year, keeping me updated on his career and family. My financial security continues, thanks to Patricia Chen's careful management of Robert's investments. I've established trust funds for my grandchildren's education and created a scholarship for low-income math students at the community college, where I still occasionally tutor. My watercolor paintings have improved enough that the local gallery features them prominently, and I've even been commissioned to create pieces for the new wing of the regional hospital. Not bad for a hobby I started in my late 60s. Life isn't perfect, of course. David's heart condition gave us a scare last winter, and my own arthritis limits my activities more each year. We've both had to adjust to the indignities and limitations of aging, but we face these challenges together with humor and grace and the wisdom of those who know that time is precious. This Christmas will mark 6 years since the night that changed everything. We'll host the usual crowd, Marcus and Abby with the children, David's family, Elena and Miguel, and several of our Thursday dinner group friends who have no family nearby. The menu will be simple but delicious, the decorations tasteful but not extravagant, the atmosphere warm and welcoming. No one will whisper cruel comments in my kitchen. No one will judge the salt and pepper shakers or the pattern on the napkins. There will be no performance anxiety, no desperate attempt to impress. Just family, just love, just belonging. Yesterday, as I stood on my porch watching the winter sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, David joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, his voice still strong despite his 76 years. "I was thinking about journeys," I replied, "about how sometimes the worst moment of your life can lead to the best." He nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. "Are you happy, Margaret, with how everything turned out?" I considered the question seriously, as I've learned to consider everything in my later years. Was I happy with how my life had unfolded? With the painful awakening at Sophia's hands, the discovery of Robert's secret work and hidden fortune, the building of this new life by the sea? "I am," I said finally, resting my head against his shoulder. Not despite the heartbreak, but because of it. It broke me open, showed me my own strength, my own. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a watercolor wash of purples and pinks in its wake. Inside the cottage, I could hear Marcus's laugh as he played with RJ, could smell the cookies Abby was baking with Lily, helping in her toddler way. "You know what's strange?" I mused. "If I could go back to that Christmas night and change things, prevent Sophia from making that cruel comment, spare myself that pain, I wouldn't do it." "No?" David's eyebrows rose in surprise. "No," I shook my head firmly, "because then I wouldn't be standing here with you, with all of this." I gestured toward the ocean, the cottage, the life we'd built. "Sometimes the worst moments are necessary for the best beginnings." He kissed my temple gently. "My wise wife." We stood in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The sound of children's laughter floated through the open window, a counterpoint to the eternal rhythm of the waves below. In that perfect moment, I thought about the many Christmases of my life, the joyful ones of childhood, the loving ones with Robert and young Marcus, the anxious ones trying to please Sophia, the transformative one that had broken and remade me, and the peaceful ones that had followed. Each had shaped me, taught me, brought me to this place of contentment and wisdom. The Christmas that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, of strength, of authenticity, of a life lived on my own terms. And for that unexpected gift, I was profoundly grateful. "Shall we go in?" David asked as the evening chill deepened. "I think I heard Abby announce that the cookies are ready." "Yes," I said, taking his hand. "Let's join our family." Together, we walked back into the warm light of the cottage, closing the door on the darkness behind us.